has made in organizing all these face-to-face and then hybrid and then finally online. So thank you very much for keeping this going on. And it is my wish today to introduce my research about mosques in Córdoba as a study case, but also as an exceptional reference when it comes to address mosques in al-Andalus. And this is because despite the great importance that mosques had, and I think this importance has not been accompanied by a proportional impact on research. And mosques of al-Andalus usually face strong difficulties for their integration into the most recent lines of research. And traditionally, they have been addressed mainly for their religious functions. And I have reflected about this quite a lot, trying to think about the possible cases. And I believe one of the cases, of the causes is because of the historical dynamics frequently experienced in this territory. After the Castilian conquest, as you may know, many of these mosques were turned into churches or into cathedrals. And then with the passing of time, we even have lost the memory of the former mosques. And also, in some cases, the flagrant loss of the Islamic constructions. So there are only in some cases hypotheses about where the mosques could have been, but we don't really have the remains to address them. But this is not only this is not the only reason. Some main problems for research today are, among others, the stagnation of some traditional historiographical beliefs, difficulties of intervening in the current buildings of cult, and also, with honorable exceptions, the lack of interest of the scientific community and of society in general. So in this panorama, Córdoba stands out as an exception that we will explore now. And this is an exception for two main reasons. First, because of the political status that the city reached in the Middle Ages. It became the Umayyad capital of al-Andalus, and then it derived in an unparalleled urban monumentalized layout, which today is leaving us with very interesting archaeological materials, which is the second reason why Córdoba is an exception. So if we speak about mosques specifically, Córdoba is representing very well, in my view, the research tendencies that I have just described. We have quite a lot evidence for minor or secondary mosques that were integrated into the urban layout, but they are usually badly represented in research because of the Great Mosque, which is usually concentrating the vast majority of the attention. So for decades now, almost the only accessible information available regarding these secondary mosques were scarce mention contained in written sources, which are usually not giving direct information about this building, but only, as I said, scarce mention. These mosques are mentioned when the accounts are trying to describe other events. And so we don't really have chronologies, we don't have descriptions, we have only just very, very few names of some mosques. We don't even know where exactly they were located. And we have also some like recording of how many mosques we had per neighborhood, as you can see here on the lower part of the screen. And these accounts are, of course, not really reliable. As you can see, that these numbers are, of course, exaggerated. Together with this, for centuries now, we have had in the city standing remains of secondary mosques, which were mainly minarets reused as belfries. And they have been part of the urban layout of the city for centuries now, as I said. And they have been sometimes individually analyzed by certain authors, but mainly from an architectural point of view, and not usually in relation among them. So these have led to preconceived assumptions, like all mosques were turned into churches in the city, like there was at least one mosque per neighborhood, and etc., etc. This panorama has lately undergone remarkable and enriching changes thanks to the recent emerging of building activities in Córdoba, which have also led to the multiplication of archaeological interventions in the city. These interventions have documented 100 of hectares of the former Islamic city, including the remain of some mosques. We have some problems when addressing these mosques from an archaeological viewpoint. And well, mainly these are small mosques that don't show great monumentality, and they have been found in a very, very poor state of conservation. Usually they are very destroyed or they have been heavily plundered. And so sometimes we cannot even identify them as mosques easily. And as we will see also along the presentation, there are no ground plants completely. We have only one, this one that we will see later. And many of these mosques were excavated in the 90s, so it's not easy to access the information that was recorded by them. Often we don't really have even pictures in color, and we usually don't have archaeological records to consult, and so we don't have the stratigraphical sequences, so it's a bit complicated to go and research about them with the traditional archaeological methodology. Also, one of the problems when addressing them is that they, in the vast majority of cases, they were never discovered in the frame of a research project. So it was not usually an archaeological intervention that aimed to record the mosque, but that aimed to clear a space in order to build a block of apartments. So this is why these are all the circumstances that are conditioning our research today. But despite these limitations, traditional affirmations that didn't have a material basis could be readdressed thanks to these findings, as we will see. So until now, we have about 15 remains of buildings that can be identified as former minor mosques. And even with these limitations, we can insert these mosques into a larger urban discourse. So we want to study them in relation to the urban context, and we want to start raising some comparative analysis. In order to do so, we need I think it is interesting to insert these mosques in the general studies that are being developed about the city, which are mainly to try to understand how the city was configured a long time, since its foundation in Roman times until almost today, and particularly in the Islamic stage, to try to understand how these cities were inserted into the urban layout and which role they played in the process of Islamization and transformation of the city. And so in order to do so, I think two main perspectives needs to be studied. So it's first mosques per se, so get to know them better informed, how were there and which chronology they had, and also within their urban context. So to deepen in the role they played in the city, we need here to speak about religion, but also political propaganda, and of course, daily life of the people who inhabited the city. And so the first question to be answered is, how are these mosques? How were they configured in terms of a structure? It might seem pretty obvious, but it's fundamental to study them in their urban context. We usually tend to think that the mosques of Córdoba had the same ground plan as the Great Mosque, which is the hypostyle type, is the typical type that we've been seeing along this workshop that was widespread along the Mediterranean. And of course, the Great Mosque of Córdoba is the, let's say, like the best example of this type that we have in al-Andalus. And as I say, we tend to think that minor mosques in Córdoba are following this ground plan, because the only fully documented example that we have is, of course, following this type too. But it's something that we cannot really affirm 100% because we don't really have the evidence. We have, as I said, only scarce remains, such as these minarets. We don't have a stratigraphical context associated to these minarets. So the only way to try to provide a chronology for them was to study the building techniques they had. And it has been essential to determine an approximate date for their construction. As you can see, we have taken some measurements of all the ashlars that were compounding these minarets, and we were also making comparisons among them and also with some other elements that are well dated and well found in the Great Mosque and in Madinat al-Sara too, and to try to see the chronologies of these pieces and also to try to see how they evolved along time. And we could see that it is, we could perceive a progressive decrease in the size of ashlars as time went by, as well as a regularization on their shape, which is leading us to think that these buildings are inserted into a plan of official constructions. So it's a pre-planned project to build these elements. It's not an element that can be built by the community spontaneously. We could also register the longevity of some of these pieces, which have experienced, as the one on the screen, multiple transformation along the centuries. And this is proving that they have been in use almost since their foundation until today. Also, we decided to approach the modulation and methodology of these mosques because we didn't really have another way of approaching the remains that were in worse state of conservation. So we didn't have elevations, we didn't have complete ground plans of anything. So we tried to see if the parts of the mosques that we have discovered had any, let's say, rhythm in their construction. So we could try to suggest a complete ground plans. And these kind of studies are very, let's say that they are very famous today in the Andalus context. There are multiple studies that aim to uncover the geometric and mathematical reasons and proportions beyond the Islamic buildings, and also to try to uncover which metric units were used for any building. And this is usually made comparing the information transmitted by written sources with the material reality. And for al-Andalus, again, the best example has been the Mosque of Córdoba. I am going to spare the details of this methodology because it's not the aim for today and because it has been published elsewhere. But I would just say here that it's a very difficult topic because it hasn't, in my view, been properly understood today. So written sources, when they speak about the Andalusi building system, they speak about the cubit as the main metric unit behind all the constructions. And so they give certain descriptions like, I don't know, the mosque in Zaragoza had 10 cubits length or 10 cubits wide. And so the approaches today have been made by measuring the current building and then making the division. And the results have been very surprising because it seems that there is 1 cubit per building that we analyze. And that's, from my point of view, a bit difficult or almost impossible. That would be like saying that today there is 1 metric system per building that we build. So I believe that the system hasn't been really well understood, and this is why I wanted to address the issue from the very beginning, turning to the starting point, who was Felix Hernandez and his studies about the Great Mosque, and which are, as I said, widely published. And he based his work in a number of written sources, and he contrasted the information in given written sources with his own measurements on the building, and concluding that there are 2 main units that are like the basis of the metric system: the Mamunni cubit and the Rasasi cubit that you have on the screen. And departing from these conclusions, there is another researcher today, Alejandro Jimenez, who has tried to put some sense into this belief that the metric system in the Islamic world is a bit chaotic and a bit random. And he has discovered the proportional reasons that are bringing together the Islamic system with the Roman system, as you can see on the screen. And basically, he's saying, or he has discovered, that all the cubits mentioned in written sources are coming from the same unit, which is the foot here, which is like 3, it has an equivalence in our centimeters. And so given this, my aim particularly was to, using these units, this Mamunni cubit, Rasasi cubit, and the foot, to try to see if the mosques that we have discovered here in Córdoba respond to these units. And I tried that in different buildings, but the best example to show this is this mosque that was that we could uncover completely, and we could see that the food was indeed like in the core when designing this construction. And we were able to recognize as well like possibly a possible building scheme for caliphal mosques in Qurtuba, which consisted on a square prayer hall followed by a square courtyard, and they both spaces had the same area, the same size, and they were also, these mosques provided with a minaret. And we could see also that this square is kind of the reason that these mosques are following when they are enlarged, the same way as it happens in the big mosque of Córdoba. As you can see, there is a square in the core of the original mosque, which is divided in two areas, one for the courtyard and one for the prayer room, which are the same size. This, let's say, this harmony is breaking at the end of the 9th century, when the enlargement of the prayer hall creates a new square. And this harmony is recovered in the Caliphate after the death of Abderrahman III with the new enlargement of the patio. So you can see that this square is always the reason when enlarging or changing the structure of these mosques. This study, of course, is not closed, as the emergence of new archaeological evidence, both in Córdoba and in the rest of al-Andalus, should complete our vision. And our study also paid attention to the only feature specified for mosques by the Quran, so this orientation towards the sacred direction, towards Mecca. And despite being an imposed characteristic, so to speak, it has revealed to be imprecise in all cases. Its accuracy, which is being subject of intense debate in historiography, didn't seem to have capital relevance in Córdoba. And so in this table, you can see the relation between the direction of mosques recorded, their chronologies, and their location. We put all this data in this table because we were trying to see if more accurate directions were related to a later chronology, thinking that maybe in a later chronology the orientation techniques would be a bit more accurate, and therefore the direction would be a bit more accurate too. But as you can see, that's not working for the Cordobesian case. I would say that directions seemed to be grouped according to their geographical areas more than to the chronology of the buildings. So you see that mosques located in the western suburbs show very similar orientations. And also, we should not despise the anthropic intention in the calculation of this parameter, regardless the urban factors. So there is, I would say that these mosques are oriented according to the geographical conditions of the place where they are built, but also there are sometimes some the will of the builder to try to accommodate the direction as far as possible. We have again this example as one of the paradigmatic ones. This is a mosque, the Fontanar Mosque, that was planned ex novo in the 10th century in an area empty until that moment. It is presiding a main street, which is 11 meters wide, and it's considered one of the key communication roads between all the suburban areas in Córdoba. And you see the organization of the streets is kind of orthogonal, and we have kind of the same orientation for all the streets, but the mosque is slightly changing that orientation in order maybe to face the orientation of Mecca more properly. And we have the same idea here in this Ollerias neighborhood, where you can see the kind of randomness when orienting the streets, but the mosque, here you have like the remains of the minaret. The mosque is facing Mecca more accurately. You see the directions 140, 143, 148, and then the mosque is facing the 116, which is closer to Mecca in Córdoba, is about 100 degrees than the rest of the remains. And you see how this idea is followed by the Great Mosque itself, which is kind of adapting itself to the previous urban layout. You see the mosque here is built kind of respecting the Roman insulas that were configuring the neighborhood where the mosque was built. I think that these characteristics are showing the plasticity of the epostyle type in al-Andalus. Is the type that is, as you well know, composed by a prayer room and a courtyard. And sometimes this courtyard had a minaret and a portico. And it is a very plastic type because it's very easy to adapt it to almost any urban circumstance. And also it's very easy to enlarge or to refurbish, because in the case of Córdoba, we just have to add or close several naves in order to transform the mosque without transforming very much the urban layout around. And again, the best example of this is the Great Mosque of Córdoba, which was enlarged several times along the centuries. Very quickly, I wanted just to say that the deepening in this structural knowledge also led to approach the forms and lifestyles of the society that use these mosques, as well as to a better understanding of this associated urban phenomena, which is mainly the most interesting thing of this study, I believe, is to see how historical processes are reflected in mosques, or how these mosques can speak about the historical processes of Islamization of the city. The interpretation of information contained in written sources in the light of archaeological information speaks about the ambivalence of mosques, and also speaks about the Umayyad dynasty putting a great effort into bringing these mosques into the urban landscape. We have a lot of mention of mosques that were built by the emirs, the caliphs, their wives, their slaves, or their closest social circles. So we are speaking here about, again, a pre-planned project, and we could say maybe an imperial project of building mosques in order to change the urban aspect of the city. And this can be seen in these examples that we have recorded archaeologically. We see how, when it comes to the wall perimeter of the city, we have mosques located, let me show here. Yeah, we have mosques located very close to the gates of the city. So it's an element that is playing a role in the scenario of the city. So when you come to the city, the first thing you see is a mosque. And then they are also located in the main roads that are configuring the urban layout of the wall perimeter. There are also mosques, of course, in the suburban area, but they are usually placed in roads of entity that are leading to these gates of the city, and they are also usually placed in relationship with other urban elements, such as baths. We have a mosque here, as you can see, that is located right opposite the baths, and this is leading us to think that there is a planned project to build all these facilities together, so people can go do their ablutions in the hammam and then go to the mosque to pray. So it's this aim to provide these suburban areas with facilities that can somehow encourage certain lifestyles and can encourage this Islamization of society. And the best example of this, I would say, is this mosque that I am presenting now, which was built again in one of the roads that are leading to the wall perimeter of the city, and that is very close to the Friday Mosque. So really, people wouldn't need, in terms of religion, they wouldn't need a new mosque here, because they can easily go to the Friday Mosque to pray. But we need to think about the context in which this mosque was built. This was built in a vernacular area, so this neighborhood was already populated when the Muslim population arrived to the city, and it was an area provided with a basilica, with a Mozarabic cemetery, we can say that it was a Christian neighborhood, and then when the Muslim population arrived, they built this mosque here as maybe as an intent to Islamize the area. And this is a table which is showing all the mentions for the early Islamic period. This is for the 8th and 9th centuries of facilities that are built on the city because members of the Umayyad family are affording them, or they are sponsoring them. And you can see how there are many mosques in this list. And this is why we are thinking that, of course, this top-bottom approach is the correct one in order to understand the role of these mosques in the configuration of the city. These patterns of insertion are respected in the caliphate. So when Abderrahman III decides to turn the emirate into a caliphate, these mosques will continue to be in use, and some others will join. So, and as you can see again, we have the same insertion patterns. We have this Fontanar Mosque that is located in one of the main areas of the neighborhood. As I said, this road that is connecting the different neighborhoods together, and this mosque is also kind of leading to an open area, possibly a square. It would be like a public space in this neighborhood. We have also another mosque nearby, which is constructed. I mean, as you can see, the remains of the mosque are very poor. We have only these foundations of a possible minaret and some of the closing walls of the possible courtyard. But this mosque was built in the most prominent part of the neighborhood, so it was in top of a hill, so we can maybe think that it was playing maybe a landscape role, like it would be like a landmark of the neighborhood. I'm trying just to change the slide, yeah. And we have also some mosques that are in relation with big cemetery areas. All this purple spot that you can see here is a cemetery. And again, we have a mosque here with some baths next to it. So it's never isolated mosques, but within a very rich urban context. And we also have a very interesting remain of mosque here. Here you can see the blue part is the blue that is the part that we could excavate, and the other is just how we believe the mosque continued. But of course, we have no remains here. But this mosque, from which we could recover the mihrab, is inserted again into a very interesting urban context, because it is a neighborhood that was also populated by a Christian population or Mozarabic population during the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. And in the 10th century, this mosque was built here. And stratigraphically, we can see how the Christian neighborhood is in regression by the time the mosque is built. And so the Islamic neighborhood is growing, meanwhile the Christian one is decreasing. And also we have for this 10th century, again, the same pattern of mosques built along very important roads of communication that are communicating the wall perimeter with the suburban area and also with other settlements in al-Andalus. And this pattern is going to disappear when the caliphate falls at the beginning of the 11th century. All these mosques in the suburban areas will now disappear, and only the ones remaining within the urban wall perimeter will be kept in use. And new mosques will be built, such as the ones you see on the screen, but these buildings are not as monumental as the ones we've seen before. We have no big ashlars anymore. We don't have any pattern with this square that I was speaking about before. So we can clearly see how these mosques are not responding to a city project anymore. So there is no dynasty, there is no official power behind these mosques. I think I have run out of time, so I will stop here. I will just like to say that there is much to be researched about mosques on Córdoba still. We, for example, are lacking a bottom-top approach. We are always thinking about this Umayyad project of the city and how they build the city according to their dynastic interests, but so far we couldn't approach the city from the society. And we have also the need to find new parallels of minor mosques in al-Andalus to be compared with the ones in Córdoba, because Córdoba cannot be understood as a model because it was the capital, and so we can find urban dynamics that are not happening elsewhere. But we could try to think of it as a reference when approaching other cases, such as the case of Toledo, which is a city in which many other minor mosques have been recorded to, but so far there is no joint research project, or there is no joint line of research for these buildings to be concentrated and studied as a whole instead of isolated. And thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the rush. And now I will stop sharing my screen if